G'day team, welcome back to another video. This is actually my second take because I just had a massive sneezing fit, got hay fever or something. I wanted to break down a topic that I've been discussing a fair bit in sort of my past 2 weeks of posts. And the reason why is because it's really a theme that deserves more time and there's a lot of nuance with it. You know, it's very difficult to communicate a complex topic such as discernment or direction or things that concern the greater movements of your life in 30 or 60 seconds. Like, you just can't really do it. So I wanted to do this video in order to hopefully clarify a little bit what I'm talking about, and for you faithful listeners that know what I'm talking about and have looked at my posts, well then hopefully this will come as at a welcome to you. It's sort of that whole idea of what I was talking about with your dreams, desires, talents, and passions. And then there was a tweet where I said there's like two paths. There's the first path where you need to knuckle down and lock in completely to whatever it is in front of you, like even if you're working at McDonald's. And then the second path is where you sort of take more of that entrepreneurial, freedom, exploration, what am I good at kind of avenue. And it is kind of a dichotomy in the sense that usually if you're locking in with what's in front of you, then you can't go down that avenue. But it's also not completely black and white. So here's the way that I've kind of understood it in my life and why this is important. The first principle, which is the principle of locking in, the principle of discipline, the principle of time under the bar. This is an indispensable principle. When Aquinas discusses virtue, he discusses that to be virtuous is that your character is continuously disposed to do the good. So for someone to become virtuous, for someone to be a truly good person in that they do the right thing every time, it's got to become a habitual disposition. It's got to become a habit. They've got to have done the good thing so much that their soul, that their character, it becomes almost incapable of doing the bad thing because they don't desire the bad thing. In fact, now they desire the good thing and they have the strength and willpower to do the good thing. So if you've got those three things, there's pretty much no reason for you to do something bad. But how do you get to the point where you're actually virtuous? Well, right at the start, it requires you to, by pure self-control or denial of what you actually desire, because at this stage I'm desiring something bad, it requires discipline and mortification and denial of the flesh to get to the point where I actually stop doing those things. But my heart might still desire them because my heart is not yet virtuous. And over the time that it actually takes for you to stop desiring the bad, then you've got a stage in the middle where it's like, okay, well, maybe I no longer to desire bad things, but I also don't desire the good. Like, I don't really enjoy prayer. I don't like going to the gym. I'm kind of at this neutral point where now it's easier to not do bad things, but I still find it difficult to do good things. By the time you get there, and then you get to the next stage, which would be, well, I actually really enjoy doing these things. It brings joy and peace to my soul to do the good, to do the hard thing, to wake up early and pray, so on and so forth. You might be looking at 2, 3, 4, 10 years where it's really been a work. You've had to work at becoming virtuous. Okay, so next step. What's this principle of time under the bar? If I have not become virtuous, if I have not spent that time under the bar, I'm going to make another video on this soon, but for me, for example, you know, I'm virtuous in some areas. I don't think I'm wrong to say that, but what kind of taught me to be virtuous was in a big way working on the dairy farm. And there was an element to which, even though it may not have been like my dream job, it may not have been what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, the fact that I was able to completely lock in and focus. And I think for a time I did think that this was going to be my career, especially when I was in the mindset that I wasn't going to study again, or before we had started Fit for the Kingdom, I was like, this is hard. This is teaching me so many things. But I needed those 2 or 3 years of working full time in order to learn all those lessons. And if I hadn't committed to that, or if COVID hadn't happened and I'd stayed at uni, I don't think I ever would have put in the time under the bar that was necessary for me to reach those conclusions, for me to reach those virtues, for me to reach those dispositions inside myself, which meant that in 2023, when I decided to go to Campion, in 2023, when I invested 5K in a course to learn how to do sales in order so I could have income throughout uni and then after, while I was living in Aussie, in 2025, when I'm doing all of this stuff in Fit for the Kingdom, despite me having to pick up new skill sets, go into new situations, new opportunities, a different country, the fact that I'd had that stability and foundation and rigid structure from the dairy farm meant that I had all of these transferable mindsets. I had these skills, I had these virtues. Sure, I didn't learn how to make a website or edit a YouTube video on the dairy farm, but I had the discipline to move into something new and be able to execute. There's definitely things that I'm doing right now which I'm not very good at, which I do not have a natural talent to do, but I think by the fact of perseverance and discipline and understanding different things that came from a very basic, sure, I mean there is complexity to it, but from the outside what might be quite a basic job, it taught me so many lessons that have been indispensable for me now in my other pursuits. So, okay, I might have learned that in 2 to 3 years. Some people it might take 5 or 10 years. But what if you've never taken those years to learn those lessons? What if since the moment you left school, you've taken a gap year, you've studied at uni, you might have switched subjects or something? What if you're trying to build your life, you're trying to make something of yourself, but you haven't committed to anything for more than 6 or 12 months? Well, that's a situation where someone might have genuine desires and talents. They might have dreams, things that they could make a career out of, but they're stuck at ground zero, or they're stuck at a very low level because they've never given themselves the opportunity, or they've never forced themselves to say, well, look, this might not be 100% ideal, but I need the stability, I need the lessons in virtue, I need the lessons in patience and discipline and working underneath someone in obedience. I need those things first. And that comes back to my point at the start of the video. I don't care if you're working at McDonald's. Like, you might be working what we would say is like the bottom level job, like pulling weeds in the garden or something. But you might be learning skills and lessons in that most simple, useless or meaningless job, if that's how you conceive of it. You might be learning indispensable things in those moments. And I think there's a lot of people who are skipping that point. They're coming to the factor like, oh yeah, I want to choose something, I want to do my hobby, I want to love my job, X, Y, Z. And it's like, brother, you haven't worked a day in your life. You haven't worked hard. You haven't sacrificed. And because you haven't done those things, because you haven't done the difficult, you're never going to be able to make it down this other career path where you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to monetize your hobby or whatever, which is harder because you don't have that foundation. You don't have that groundwork laid of being virtuous, of having committed. Now, where does this side go wrong? I've committed to this job, it's making me money, I'm growing in skills, I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life. Well, maybe that last sentence is what I would challenge, because I think there's so many dispassionate men in the world right now. You know, we have that classic movie trope, you know, Fight Club, working in the office, saving up to buy the next piece of IKEA furniture, the next model of iPhone. And you have these guys who've given over all their energy, all their life force, all their passion, that fire maybe that they had within them in their youth. I mean, there's probably a lot of guys who don't even have that fire anymore because the world has just extinguished it. But we've also gotten so bad to the point where people are just willing to live their entire lives doing something that they hate or doing something that they don't like. And it's very dispassionate. You know, when someone does that, it eventually grinds you down. It grinds down your soul. It grinds down your personality because there's no freedom of expression. There's no exercise of the will. You're never actually doing what you want to do. And I don't think that's healthy. And St. Catherine of Siena said, like, if you just be who God calls you to be, you'll set the world on fire. Something along those lines. And I think that's a very important concept to think on and pray on and discern, because as much as I'm obviously a fan and I've given you that importance of just, look, mate, I don't care what's in front of you, you need to lock in. That's also just our starting point, because eventually you should get to a place where, I mean, especially if you're working and praying and developing your interior life, you know, God will have called you to something specific. You might be called to be a saint through that job. Maybe you'll start a business in that industry, even though it's not like your favorite industry, you might be really good at it. You know, you can change the world through that. But you have to listen to those calls. You have to figure out what your talents are. You have to figure out what you're called to, because it might not be that thing. It might not be that thing that you've spent the first 5 or 10 years of your adulthood working in. That might not be what God has in mind for you. You might have to explore and work and exercise that freedom to grow into something bigger or something better. So we definitely need that. And I guess that's where the positive side of this is that I think ideally, you know, we should have skilled and passionate tradesmen, financiers, teachers, like in every industry. But I also, I think we should avoid locking ourselves in a box very early on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't lock in at all, but you also have to keep in mind that, you know, we are creatures of great passion and great love. And the great men of history were on fire. You know, Alexander conquered majority of the known world. You know, the Romans conquered like 20 or 30% of the landmass. We had so many great leaders, great speakers, great orators, great politicians, inventors, you know, great artists, saints. These weren't people that just, you know, settled into some random job and were happy to live out their lives clocking off at 5 o'clock and not pushing themselves in the weekend. They were people that, sure, they all had different upbringings, but I think if you had to characterize all of them, they were people who I guess followed that calling that they had, or that they had these movements within them that were so strong that they had to follow them, and that they changed the world, and they like paved these great, you know, paths of fire where they walked and they changed history, and then people around them were just sort of looking on as spectators. I think that's something we need more of. I think that's something that needs to be emulated. And yeah, I guess I'll always come back to it. That is why it's so important to have that interior life, to have that structure, to have that silence. Because once you've sort of spent time in there, I really think that you've got a platform, you've got the structure, you've got the launch pad to really start giving this some thought. So I don't want you to skip this side, I don't want you to skip this lesson, but look ahead, open your eyes, listen to your heart. You know, there might be things in there which you haven't realized yet, but you know, God has a plan for all of us, and that his plan is most likely not that we work at McDonald's. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to break down for today. There's a lot of micro ways in which this principle breaks down, like discipline equals freedom, of course, the famous maxim from Jocko. If I have the discipline to work out every day, if I have the discipline to eat right and be healthy, people will look on and say, well, you're not giving yourself freedom. You're not giving yourself freedom to stay up late and eat tasty junk food. And it's like, well, no, I'm disciplining myself in this way. So then in the future, when, you know, I've got grandkids or whatever, I have the freedom to be able to go and hike with them, to go to the gym with them. I've got the freedom to protect my family when the time comes because I've disciplined myself initially. So it sort of applies at various levels of life. Discipline gives you freedom. To be disciplined now, to be locked in now, to do the right things now, gives you the freedom and the opportunities in the future to do even more, to do even greater things. So hopefully that's clear. I guess I could break this down a bit more if necessary, but I think very practically that's probably what I've been talking about in terms of the structure that you need, the years of discipline, the grind that you need in order to then open those doors for yourself in the future. All right, I hope this was helpful. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, if you have any comments. If you enjoyed the video, definitely let me know. It's always good to have feedback. Any video suggestions or topics that you'd like me to break down, send them through as well. And subscribe if you haven't already. You can also follow me on Spotify and you'll get all of these in audio form. And follow my Insta and Twitter to stay up to date with everything. But yeah, super exciting times ahead. We'll keep you all posted. God bless.